I was standing in my own kitchen when my son looked me in the eye and said, "You don't belong here." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He said it the same way someone might comment on the weather. And for a second, I thought I heard him wrong. Because I was standing in my house, the same house I'd been in for over 30 years, the same kitchen where I used to pack his school lunches, where I stood every morning while his father drank coffee and read the paper. So I asked him calm as I could, "What did you just say?" He didn't hesitate. I said, "This isn't really your place anymore, Mom." Behind him, Brittany was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching me like this was something they had already talked through. Like I had missed a meeting. I remember noticing small things in that moment, not the words, not right away. The fruit bowl I used to keep by the sink was gone. The chairs had been replaced. Even the smell was different. Not bad. Just not mine. I set my keys down on the counter slowly. "Since when?" Ethan shrugged. "It's just the way things are now." That answer didn't make sense, so I asked another question. "What does that mean?" He sighed like I was the one making things difficult. "Mom, you said you wanted help. That's what this is." Help! That word had been floating around the house a lot lately. Help with bills, help with paperwork, help with the mortgage. I looked at him, really looked this time, and realized something I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't asking anymore. I walked over to the back door and tried to punch in the garage code out of habit. It beeped red. "That code doesn't work," Ethan said behind me. "We changed it." I turned back. "Why would you change the code to my house?" "It's easier this way," Brittany said, finally speaking. "We needed something more secure." More secure from who I asked. Neither of them answered that. I stood there for a second, trying to line everything up in my head. The code, the furniture, the tone in his voice. Then I asked the one thing that mattered. "Ethan, whose house do you think this is?" He didn't even blink. "Ours!" It landed heavier than anything else he'd said. I let that sit for a moment, not because I agreed with it, because I wanted to understand how he got there. "I bought this house with your father," I said. "We paid it off. It's in my name." "That's not exactly how it works anymore," he replied. "Not exactly." There it was again, that soft way of saying something that didn't feel soft at all. I walked past him and opened the drawer where I kept my mail, or at least where I used to keep it. It was empty. "Where are my statements?" I asked. "I've been handling those," Ethan said. "You don't need to worry about it." I turned around slowly. I didn't say I was worried. I asked where they are. He rubbed the back of his neck like I was putting him in an awkward position. "They're online now. Everything's digital. It's just easier." Everything was easier. That seemed to be the theme. Easier to change the locks. Easier to move things around. Easier to make decisions without me. I walked over to the table and pulled out a chair. It wasn't the same one I'd had last month. Different wood, different weight. I sat down anyway. "Ethan," I said, "I want you to explain something to me." He stayed standing. Brittany didn't move. "When you say this isn't my house anymore, what exactly are you talking about?" He looked at Brittany first, just for a second, but I saw it. Then he looked back at me. "Mom, you signed everything. We went over this." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic, not yet. "What did I sign?" He frowned like he couldn't believe we were having this conversation again. The refinance, the paperwork, the ownership stuff. Ownership. I repeated it in my head slower than he said it. "I never gave you my house," I said. "Yes, you did," he replied. Still calm, still steady. "You just don't remember." That was the first moment something shifted. Not outside, inside. Because up until then, I thought this was a disagreement. But now I realized he was certain. And if he was certain, that meant something had already been put in place. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat there in a kitchen that didn't feel like mine anymore, looking at my son like I was seeing him for the first time. Then I reached for my phone. Not to call him out, not to call anyone in the family. I scrolled past his name, past Brittany's, and stopped on someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. And I hit call. I let the phone ring once before I ended the call. Not because I changed my mind, because I realized I wasn't ready to say anything yet. I set the phone face down on the table and looked back up at Ethan. He was still standing there waiting for me to react, waiting for something loud, something emotional, something he could push back against. I didn't give him that. Instead, I pushed my chair and stood up and walked past him without a word. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm going upstairs," I said. "That's our room now," Brittany said quickly. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, not because I was asking permission, just long enough to let that sentence settle. Then I turned and walked up anyway. The hallway looked the same at first glance, same walls, same light fixture, but the details were off. The frame photos had been rearranged, The rug I picked out years ago was gone. Even the air felt different, colder somehow. I walked into what used to be my bedroom. They had changed everything. New bedding, new furniture, different curtains. My dresser was gone. Not moved. Gone. I opened the closet. Half of it was filled with Brittany's clothes. The other half, empty. No boxes, no explanation. Just space where my things used to be. I stood there for a moment holding onto the doorframe, trying to remember if I had agreed to any of this. Nothing came to mind. I closed the closet and walked back downstairs. Ethan was in the kitchen again, leaning against the counter like we hadn't just had that conversation. "You should have told me you were doing all this," I said. He let out a small laugh. "Mom, we've been talking about this for months." "No," I said. "You've been talking, I've been listening. That's the same thing." "It's not." Brittany picked up her phone, barely looking up. "We just thought you'd be happier with less to manage." Happier. That word again. I leaned against the table, steadying myself, not because I was about to fall, but because I needed something solid under my hand. "When did you decide I couldn't manage my own life?" I asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at Brittany again. That same quick glance. Then he said, "No one said that. You changed the codes. You moved my things. You're handling my accounts. That's exactly what that says." He straightened up a little sharper this time. "We're helping you. Why are you making this into something it's not?" "Because it already was something. I just hadn't named it yet." I looked around the kitchen again, at the new chairs, the missing fruit bowl, the counter that didn't have any of my usual clutter. It looked like a house someone had staged for a showing. Clean, neutral, impersonal. "How long has it been like this?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "The paperwork, the ownership stuff. How long ago did I sign that?" Ethan shrugged. "A few months, maybe more. It was all part of the refinance." Refinance. I remembered that word. He had sat across from me at the same table, explaining how interest rates had dropped, how it would be smart to adjust things, how we could optimize the house. I remembered him sliding papers toward me. I remembered signing them. I did not remember anything about ownership. "You told me that was about lowering payments," I said. "It was," he replied, "and restructuring things." "What things?" "The house, Mom." That answer was too simple. Too clean, like it had been practiced. I pulled out the chair again and sat down. "Walk me through it," I said. "All of it." He exhaled slowly like he was running out of patience. "Mom, we went to the bank. You signed the documents. The house is under both of our names now. That's it." "That's not it," I said. "That's everything." Brittany finally looked up from her phone. "It's normal, you know. Families do this all the time." "Families don't erase each other," I said. No one spoke after that. The silence stretched just long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then Ethan pushed off the counter and grabbed his keys. "I have to head out," he said. "We'll talk about this later when you've calmed down." I almost laughed at that. Calm down? I wasn't upset, not in the way he thought. I was paying attention. "That's fine," I said. He paused at the door like he expected more. When he didn't get it, he left. The front door closed. The house went quiet. Brittany stayed in the kitchen for another minute, then followed him out without saying a word to me. And just like that, I was alone, in a house that felt like it belonged to someone else. I sat there for a long time, not moving, not crying, just thinking, running through every conversation I'd had with Ethan over the past year. Every time he said, "Don't worry about it." Every time I handed something over because it felt easier. At some point, I stood up and walked to the small cabinet near the fridge, the one place I knew I hadn't touched in a while. Inside were old folders, statements, copies of things I used to keep track of before Ethan took over. I pulled them out one by one and laid them on the table. If he was right, it would all be there. If he wasn't, I picked up the first folder, opened it, and started reading. Slowly. Carefully. Like it was the first time I was actually looking. I flipped through the first folder and realized something right away. The dates didn't line up. Not in an obvious way, not enough for anyone to panic, but enough to feel off. Statements that used to come monthly were missing. Some were replaced with summaries I didn't recognize. The formatting was different, cleaner, digital. I checked another folder. Same thing. Less paper, more gaps. I pushed the folders aside and stood up, walking over to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one I used to sit at every Sunday afternoon to go through bills with a pen and a cup of coffee. The drawer was locked. That had never happened before. I stood there for a second, staring at it, then walked back into the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I opened my banking app, or at least I tried to. The password didn't work. I typed it again, slower this time. Still wrong. I hit reset password. The verification code didn't come to my phone. It went somewhere else. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. That wasn't a mistake. That was a change. I set the phone down and leaned against the counter, pressing my palm flat against the surface just to feel something steady. This didn't happen overnight. That was the part I couldn't ignore anymore. I started walking through the house again, slower this time. Not as someone living in it, as someone studying it. The living room first. The couch had been replaced a few weeks ago. I remembered that. Brittany said the old one was outdated. I agreed at the time. It seemed harmless. Now I noticed something else. The side table I used every night where I kept my reading glasses and a small lamp was gone. In its place was something decorative. No lamp, no place for anything personal. I moved into the dining area. The table was new, lighter wood, different shape. The chairs were the same ones I noticed earlier, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Everything was like that. Not wrong, just not mine. I walked down the hallway toward the utility closet. The breaker panel was open. That wasn't unusual by itself. Ethan had been doing some upgrades. That's what he called them. But taped to the inside of the panel door was a printed sheet. Labels. Every switch renamed. Kitchen, living room, upstairs bedroom, basement suite. Suite! I read that word twice. Then I walked toward the basement door. I hadn't gone down there in a while. No real reason to. Ethan had been using it for storage. I opened the door and turned on the light. The stairs creaked the same way they always had. That part hadn't changed. At the bottom, I stopped. The space looked different. Cleaned out, rearranged, furnished. There was a bed now, a small dresser, a lamp, a chair in the corner. It wasn't storage anymore. It was a room, a finished one. I walked a little further in and noticed something else. A small stack of my things, folded clothes, a box with a few personal items, nothing else. Not everything I owned, just enough to live with. I stood there looking at it and felt something settle into place in my head. This wasn't random. This wasn't temporary. This was planned. Not all at once, not loudly, but piece by piece. The new furniture, the missing mail, the changed passwords, the locked drawers, the labeled breaker panel. And now this! A place for me. Just not upstairs. I walked back up slowly, closing the basement door behind me. The house felt quieter than before. Or maybe I was just listening differently. I went into the kitchen again and picked up my phone. This time I didn't try the bank. I opened Brittany's social media. Her account was public. It didn't take long. Photos from the last few months. Smiling in the kitchen, standing in front of the house, sitting on the new couch. Captions like, "Our space. Finally making this place ours. Starting fresh." I scrolled further. A post from 3 weeks ago. A picture of Ethan holding a set of keys standing in front of the house. Caption, "New chapter." I stared at that one a little longer than the others, because I didn't remember any chapter ending or starting. I locked my phone and set it down carefully on the counter. Then I walked back to the table where the folders were still spread out. I pulled one closer and opened it again. This time I wasn't just looking at numbers. I was looking for patterns, signatures, dates, anything that connected the version of events in my head to the one Ethan was describing. I found my name. I found my signature. More than once. Clean, consistent, no hesitation in the lines, which meant one thing. I had signed these. I just hadn't understood them. I sat there staring at the page, tracing my own name with my finger like it might explain itself if I looked long enough. Then I heard the front door open again. Footsteps. Not rushed, not loud. Familiar. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the paper as the sound of keys hit the counter behind me, and I waited for him to speak first. I kept my finger on my name right where I had signed it and didn't look up. "You're going through old files now," Ethan said, like it was mildly inconvenient. His tone hadn't changed. That was the part that bothered me most. Still calm, still reasonable. I turned the page slowly before answering. "I'm going through my files." "They're not really yours anymore," he said. That made me look up. He was standing by the counter, setting his keys down like this was just another normal evening. "Explain that," I said. He leaned back against the counter. "Mom, we've been over this. Everything's consolidated now. It's just easier to manage." For who, I asked? For all of us. I closed the folder and placed it neatly on the table. "Ethan, I want you to listen carefully," I said, "because I'm only going to ask this once." He didn't move. "Did you put your name on this house without telling me what it meant?" He let out a breath through his nose like I was asking something unnecessary. "I didn't do anything without you signing it." "That's not what I asked." "It's the same thing." "No," I said. "It's not." The room went quiet for a second. Then Brittany walked in behind him carrying a shopping bag like she had just come back from running errands. She stopped when she saw the papers on the table. "Oh," she said lightly. "Are we doing this again?" I looked at her. "Doing what?" "Going over paperwork like something went wrong," she replied. "Nothing went wrong." I turned back to Ethan. "You told me we were lowering the mortgage." "We did." "You didn't tell me you were adding yourself to the deed." He shrugged. "It was part of the process. That's not something you leave out." "It wasn't a big deal." I leaned forward slightly. "It is when it changes who owns the house." Brittany set the bag down and crossed her arms. "You're acting like we stole something from you." I didn't answer her. I kept my eyes on Ethan. "Did you explain that to me clearly?" I asked. "Yes." "When?" "At the bank? At the table? You were right there." "I remember being there," I said. "I don't remember you saying I was giving up control of my home." "You weren't giving it up," he replied. "You were sharing it with you." "Yes." "And now you're telling me I don't belong here." He didn't respond immediately. That hesitation told me more than anything he'd said so far. Brittany stepped in. "No one said you don't belong. You're twisting it." I looked at her. "He said it. Right there in this kitchen." She shrugged. "You're focusing on one sentence. Because it matters." "It was taken out of context." "What context makes that okay?" I asked. She didn't answer that. Ethan pushed himself off the counter, a little more impatient now. "Mom, you're blowing this up. We've been taking care of everything. Bills, maintenance, taxes. You don't have to worry about any of it anymore." "I didn't ask you to take everything," I said. "You said you wanted help." "I said I didn't want to deal with paperwork every week. That's not the same thing as handing over my house." He ran a hand through his hair. "It's just a house." That landed harder than anything else. I sat back in my chair and looked at him. "No," I said quietly, "it's not." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan walked over to the table and placed his hand flat on the documents. "Mom, listen to me," he said. "We're trying to build something here, for all of us." "For you," I said. "For the family." I shook my head. "A family doesn't erase the person who built it." "That's not what we're doing." "It is when I can't access my own accounts, when my mail disappears, when I have to ask permission to use my own kitchen." "You don't need permission," Brittany said quickly. "Then why does it feel like I do?" I asked. She didn't answer. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "You're making this emotional. And you're pretending it's not." "That's because it's not. It's practical." "Practical doesn't usually involve changing locks and moving someone into the basement." "It's more comfortable down there," he said. "For who?" I asked again. "For you," he insisted. I let out a small breath. Not frustration, just clarity. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a position. One he was standing in firmly. I reached forward and pulled one of the documents closer, sliding it across the table toward him. "Read this part," I said. He glanced down but didn't pick it up. "I've read it." "Read it out loud." "I don't need to." "I do." He hesitated. Then reluctantly he picked up the paper and scanned the section I had marked. "Joint tenancy," he said. "Shared ownership." I nodded. "And what does that mean if something happens?" "It means we both have rights." "And if I disagree with how you're using the property?" He paused. "That's not how this works," he said. "That's exactly how it works," I replied. The room went quiet again. Not tense, not loud, just settled. Like everything that needed to be said had finally been put on the table. Ethan set the paper down. "You're overthinking this," he said. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I'm just starting to understand it." I closed the folder, stacked the papers neatly, and stood up. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. And for the first time since he said those words to me, I wasn't trying to argue my place in that house anymore. I was trying to understand exactly how I had lost it. I carried the folders into the living room and sat down on the edge of the couch, keeping everything stacked neatly in my lap. Not because I was organized, because I didn't trust anything being out of place anymore. I opened the refinance packet again, this time slower. Every page, every line. Not skimming, not assuming. Reading it the way I should have the first time. The first few pages looked normal enough. Loan terms, interest rate, monthly payment breakdown. That part checked out. Lower rate, slightly different structure, nothing alarming. Then I got to the section I had missed before. Ownership. Not highlighted, not explained, just there. Buried in language that didn't sound like anything important unless you already knew what it meant. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. I read it twice, then a third time. My name was there. Ethan's name was right next to it. Equal. I leaned back slightly, letting the paper rest against my knee. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't a typo. That was a decision. And I had signed under it. I flipped to the next page. Signature line. Mine. Same handwriting, same pressure, same date. No hesitation in the ink, which meant one thing. I wasn't tricked into signing. I was walked into it. That realization settled differently. It wasn't about being fooled. It was about being guided just far enough without being told where I was actually going. I turned to the next document. A disclosure form. Paragraph after paragraph of standard language. Then one line stood out. Borrower acknowledges full understanding of changes to ownership structure. I stared at that sentence. Full understanding. I let out a quiet breath. No, I said to myself, I didn't. But the paper said I did. And legally, that mattered. I set that page aside and reached for my phone again. This time I didn't open the app. I called the bank. After a few minutes navigating the automated system, I got a person. Hi, I said. I have a question about a refinance on my property. Of course, ma'am. Can I have your name? I gave it. She pulled up the account. I see the loan here, she said. What would you like to know? I want to confirm who has access to this account. There was a brief pause as she checked. It looks like you and Ethan Whitmore are both listed. I don't have access to the online account, I said. That's because the primary login is under his email, she replied. Primary. That word again. Can that be changed? I asked. Yes, but both parties would typically need to authorize that. Of course they would. Was I present when this account was set up? I asked. Yes, ma'am. Our records show both borrowers were present at closing. Closing. I remembered sitting at that table. I remembered the stack of papers. I remembered Ethan saying, just sign here more than once. I did not remember anyone explaining that I was stepping into a shared ownership position. Do your records indicate whether the ownership change was explained in detail? I asked. There was a pause. I can't speak to the exact conversation, ma'am, she said, but the documents do include disclosures. Of course they did. I thanked her and ended the call. The room felt quieter after that, not because anything had changed, because things had become clearer. I set the phone down and picked up another sheet. This one was newer, not part of the original refinance. A transaction summary, large withdrawal, another one, then a transfer. I followed the numbers down the page. They weren't random. They were structured. Money moving out of the line of credit tied to the house, into something else. Something I didn't recognize. I walked back into the kitchen, papers in hand. Ethan was still there, leaning against the counter again, like he hadn't moved. You're using the equity, I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. It's an investment, he replied. In what? Real estate. I held up the paper. With this, it's temporary. That's not what this looks like. He pushed off the counter and stepped closer. Mom, this is how people grow assets. You leverage what you have. What I have, I corrected. What we have, he said. I shook my head slightly. You didn't just add yourself to the house. You started using it. I told you we were restructuring things. You didn't tell me you were risking it. It's not a risk. All investments are a risk. This one isn't. I let that sit there for a second. Not because I believed him. Because I wanted to see if he believed himself. You've already taken money out, I said. It's part of the plan. What plan? He hesitated, just for a moment. Then he said, you wouldn't understand all the details. That was new. Not help, not support. Dismissal. I understand enough, I said. I understand that my house is now tied to something I didn't agree to. You did agree. I agreed to lower a mortgage, not to fund your decisions. They're good decisions. According to who? He didn't answer that. Brittany walked in again, glancing at the papers in my hand. Oh my God, she said under her breath, you're still on this. I didn't look at her. I kept my focus on Ethan. If this goes wrong, I said, what happens to the house? It won't go wrong. That's not what I asked. He looked at me, expression tightening slightly. It's fine, he said. Everything's covered. Answer the question. He didn't. And that was enough. Because silence at that point said more than anything else he could have. I lowered the paper slowly and placed it on the counter between us. Not as an accusation. As a fact. Then I looked at him, really looked this time, and saw something I hadn't seen before. Not confidence, not control, pressure. And underneath that, something he wasn't saying. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about taking over the house. This was about needing it. I slid the paper back toward him and didn't wait for him to pick it up. Instead, I turned, grabbed my purse from the chair, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Ethan asked. I didn't stop walking. Out. That's not an answer. It's enough of one. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, not hard, not soft, just closed. The air felt different outside, cooler, cleaner. For For the first time that day, I could think without someone standing in front of me explaining things I hadn't agreed to. I got in my car and sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. Then I picked up my phone again. This time I didn't hesitate. "Daniel Klein, please," I said when the receptionist answered. There was a short pause. "And your name?" "Margaret Whitmore." Another pause longer this time. "Let me see if he's available." I stared straight ahead through the windshield while I waited, watching a neighbor walk their dog across the street like it was any normal afternoon. "Ms. Whitmore," a man's voice came on the line. "Yes." "This is Daniel. I need to ask you a question," I said. "About a house." There was no hesitation on his end. "All right." "I signed refinance papers a few months ago," I continued. "My son is now on the ownership. I didn't fully understand what I was signing. And now he's using the property for financial transactions I didn't agree to." Silence for a second. Not confusion, consideration. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. I want you to tell me exactly what you remember. No assumptions, just facts." That part mattered. Facts. So I gave them to him. The meeting at the bank, the papers, what Ethan said, what he didn't say, the changes in the house, the accounts I couldn't access, the money moving out. I didn't rush it, and he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked one question. "Did anyone explain in clear terms that you were transferring partial ownership of your home?" "No," I said. "Did you have independent counsel present?" "Number. Did you feel pressure to sign at the time?" I thought about that. Not pressure like someone forcing my hand, but pressure like trust. "Yes," I said finally. From him. Another short pause. Then he said something very simple. "All right." No panic, no dramatic reaction. Just that. "Can you come in today?" he asked. "I can." "Bring every document you have. Everything. Don't organize it. Don't filter it. Just bring it." "I already started looking through them," I said. "Stop," he replied immediately. I blinked. Why? "Because I want to see them as they are. The order matters." That made sense. "Okay, I'll make time for you at 3, he said. "Does that work?" "It does." "Margaret," he added before ending the call. "Yes." "Don't discuss this with your son until we talk." I wasn't planning to. "Good." The line went quiet. I set the phone down in my lap and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I started the car. His office was exactly what I expected. Not flashy, not modern. Bookshelves, files, a desk that looked like it had been used for decades. Daniel himself was older than I remembered. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, calm, direct. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Let's take a look," he said, gesturing to the stack of papers I set in front of him. He went through them one by one. Not quickly, not slowly, carefully. Every now and then he'd stop, mark something, and move on. I sat across from him, hands folded, watching his face more than the documents, looking for any reaction. But he didn't give much away. After about 20 minutes, he set the last page down. Then he leaned back in his chair. "All right," he said again. I waited. "What you're describing," he continued, "falls into a category we see more often than people realize." "That doesn't make it better," I said. "No," he agreed. "But it does make it recognizable." I nodded once. He picked up one of the documents and tapped it lightly. "This refinance," he said, "is valid on its face. You signed it. The bank processed it correctly." I expected that. But he added, "That's not the only thing that matters." I didn't say anything. I let him keep going. "There are situations," he said, "where a transaction can be challenged, even if it was signed, if there's evidence of what we call undue influence." "I've heard that term," I said. "Most people have," he replied. "Few understand it." He leaned forward slightly. "It doesn't mean someone forced you," he explained. "It means someone used a position of trust to guide you into a decision you didn't fully understand, in a way that benefits them." I let that sit for a moment. "That sounds about right," I said. He nodded once. Now he continued, "That doesn't automatically undo anything. It means we have a direction to explore." "Explore how?" I asked. "We start by building a timeline," he said, "when things changed, what was said, what wasn't. We look at financial movement, communication, patterns." "Patterns," I repeated. "Yes." I thought about the house, the codes, the basement, the accounts. "They're there," I said quietly. "I believe you," he replied. "The question is whether we can show them clearly enough." He paused, then added, "And whether you're prepared for what that process looks like." I met his eyes. "What does it look like?" "It looks like not arguing," he said. "Not confronting, not reacting." I almost smiled at that. "I haven't been doing much of that anyway." "Good," he said. "Because from this point forward, everything needs to be deliberate." He tapped the papers again. Every decision, every conversation, every move. I nodded slowly. Not because I understood everything yet, but because I understood one thing. This wasn't going to be fixed by talking. It was going to be fixed by proving. I placed the folders back on Daniel's desk and didn't reach for them again. Tell me what you need from me, I said. He nodded once like that was the right question. First, he said, you stop trying to fix this emotionally. That won't be a problem. I figured, he replied. Second, you document everything, not in your head, on paper, dates, times, conversations, financial changes, access issues. I've already started noticing things, I said. Noticing isn't enough, he replied. We need structure. That word again. Structure. Everything Ethan had done suddenly made more sense in that context. Daniel pulled a yellow legal pad from his drawer and slid it toward me. Start from the refinance, he said. Work forward. Don't skip anything just because it seems small. Nothing about this feels small anymore, I said. He almost smiled at that. Good, he said. That means you're paying attention. By the time I got back home, it was quiet again. Too quiet, no voices, no movement, just the sound of the house settling the way it always had. Only now it felt like I was the one out of place. I set my purse down, took off my shoes, and walked straight to the table. Not to argue, not to confront, to write. I opened the legal pad and started with the date of the refinance. I wrote down everything I could remember. Where we sat, what Ethan said, what he didn't say, how fast the papers were handed to me, how often he used the word routine. Then I moved forward. The first time the Wi-Fi password didn't work. The day the garage code changed. The moment I realized my mail wasn't arriving the way it used to. Each entry felt small on its own, but lined up. It looked like a plan. I paused for a second, pen hovering over the page. Then I added one more line. The day he said I didn't belong. That one didn't need much detail. It was already clear. Ethan came home later that evening. I heard the door open, keys hit the counter, the usual routine. I didn't stop writing. You're still on that? He asked. I glanced up briefly. I'm organizing things. He walked over, looked at the notepad, then back at me. For what? So I don't forget. You're not going to forget, he said. You're just overthinking. I nodded slightly. Maybe. That seemed to satisfy him more than arguing would have. He shrugged and walked away. That was new. Before he pushed back. Explained. Justified. Now he stepped around it. Because I wasn't giving him anything to push against. The next morning I started with the bank again. Not the general line. A branch. I drove there. Sat down with someone in person and asked very simple questions. What transactions have been made against this property? Who authorized them? Where did the funds go? They couldn't answer everything, but they answered enough. The withdrawals matched the documents I had found. The timeline lined up, and the destination accounts, they weren't mine. Back at home, I added more to the list. Dates, amounts, notes. I didn't try to interpret anything. I just recorded it. Daniel's voice stayed in the back of my mind, clear enough to show. Brittany came into the kitchen while I was writing. She poured herself coffee, glanced at the pad, then at me. You know, this is a lot of stress for no reason, she said. I kept writing. No reason. Everything's under control, she said. Ethan knows what he's doing. That's good, I replied. Because I'd like to know what he's doing too. She let out a small laugh. You're acting like this is some kind of scam. I set the pen down and looked at her. I'm acting like I want to understand where my house is. She rolled her eyes slightly. It's right here. That's not what I asked. She didn't answer that. Instead, she took her coffee and walked out. By the end of the second day, the legal pad was half full. Not with opinions, with facts, patterns, changes. Things I had ignored when they were happening because they didn't seem worth questioning. Now they were. All of them. Daniel called that afternoon. Have you started documenting? He asked. Yes. How detailed? Enough to see the pattern, I said. That's what we need, he replied. I've started reviewing comparable cases. Cases, I repeated. Yes. Situations where property ownership was challenged based on influence and misrepresentation. And it's not simple, he said. But it's not impossible either. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the pages in front of me. What do you need next? Bank statements, full access if you can get it, and any communication, emails, messages, anything tied to the refinance. I'll get what I can. Don't push for access yet, he said quickly. If they sense what you're doing, they'll tighten control. They already have. Then we work around it. That made sense, Margaret, he added. Yes. From here on out, you don't react. You observe. I can do that. I believe you can. I ended the call and sat there for a moment, not overwhelmed, not emotional, focused, because for the first time since Ethan said those words to me, I wasn't trying to figure out how to stay in that house. I was figuring out exactly how it had been taken from me and how to take it back without ever raising my voice. I closed the notebook and ran my hand over the cover like I was sealing something in place. Not the story, just the part of it where I had to pretend I didn't understand what was happening. 'Cause now I did. And once you see something clearly, you don't get to go back to confusion. The next few days were quiet, not tense, not dramatic, just different. Ethan still moved through the house like everything was under control. Brittany still posted photos like nothing had changed. But I stopped asking questions out loud. I stopped reacting to what they said. I stopped trying to be included. Instead, I paid attention. Every time Ethan took a call and stepped outside, every time Brittany mentioned something about timing or closing, every time a piece of mail didn't make it to the table, I wrote it down. Not because I needed to remember, because I needed to show it. Daniel moved faster than I expected. Within a week, he had requested transaction, histories, flagged irregularities, and started building a formal timeline from what I had documented. He didn't promise anything. He didn't say we would win, but he said something better. This is enough to raise questions. And in situations like this, questions matter. One afternoon, he asked me to come back into the office. He laid everything out on his desk again. But this time it wasn't just my papers. It was organized, structured, clear. This, he said, tapping the stack, is how it looks when someone else reads your story. I looked down at it. Dates aligned, transactions matched, gaps filled, patterns visible. It didn't feel emotional anymore. It felt undeniable. Based on this, he continued, we can formally challenge parts of the ownership structure. Not everything, but enough to shift control. Shift it back, I asked. Possibly, he said. Or at least prevent further use of the property without your consent. That was enough. I didn't need everything at once. I just needed the direction to change. The first official step wasn't loud. No confrontation, no announcement, just paperwork, notices, requests, things that didn't make noise, but made impact. Ethan noticed the shift before I said anything. Of course he did. People like him always notice when control starts slipping. He found me in the kitchen one morning holding a letter. What is this? He asked. I looked at it briefly. It's documentation. For what? For the house. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. You went to a lawyer, he asked. I didn't answer right away. Then I said I asked questions. That's not what this looks like. No, I said calmly. It's what it is. He set the letter down on the counter harder than necessary. Why would you do this to me? He asked. That question hung in the air for a second. Then I said, you're asking the wrong question. Oh, really? Yes! He stared at me, waiting. The question is, I continued, why did you think you could do this to me? That was the first time he didn't have an immediate answer. Things didn't fall apart overnight. That's not how real life works. There were conversations, meetings, back and forth discussions that never happened in the same room. But the direction was clear. The access changed. The control shifted. The confidence he had started to crack. Not loudly, quietly, the same way it had been built. A few weeks later, the house felt different again. Not like it used to, but closer. More balanced, more mine. Ethan wasn't there as often. Brittany stopped posting as much about the house. The noise around me faded, not because everything was fixed, because everything was defined. One morning, I sat outside on the porch with a cup of coffee. Same chair I'd used for years, same view. Nothing dramatic, just quiet. I thought about that night in the kitchen, the way he looked at me, the way he said those words like they were already true. You don't belong here. I repeated it in my head once. Then I let it go, because it wasn't about belonging. It never was. It was about control. And the moment I stopped arguing about belonging and started paying attention to control, everything changed. Family isn't who stands in your house. Family is who respects that it's yours. It's who doesn't need to rewrite your role to make themselves feel bigger. It's who doesn't take your trust and turn it into leverage. I used to think love meant making things easier for the people around you, saying yes, letting things slide, trusting that intentions mattered more than details. I don't think that anymore. Now I think details are everything. Who signs what? Who explains what? Who benefits from what? That's where the truth lives. I finished my coffee and set the cup down on the small table beside me. The house was quiet. Not empty, not unfamiliar. Just steady And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to hold on to it. I was simply sitting in it, on my terms, exactly where I belonged. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to win an argument. I just paid attention long enough to understand what was really happening. And that changed everything. What I went through wasn't loud. It didn't look like the kind of family drama people talk about at dinner. There were no broken plates, no shouting matches, just quiet decisions, small changes, and trust being used in ways I didn't see until it was almost too late. That's the part most people miss. Not all family betrayal comes with warning signs you can hear. Sometimes it shows up as help, as convenience, as someone saying, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." If there's one thing I learned, it's this: never sign something you don't fully understand. Never give up control just because it feels easier. And never assume that family means safe. Because sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who know exactly where the lines are and how to step over them quietly. But I also learned something else. You don't have to fight loudly to take your life back. You don't have to destroy someone to protect yourself. You just have to be willing to see clearly and act when it matters. That's what real revenge looks like. Not anger, not chaos, just truth, patience, and timing. That's why stories like this matter. Because the best family revenge stories aren't about hurting someone back. They're about reclaiming what was yours in the first place. The best revenge stories don't end in destruction. They end in control. And most real family drama doesn't happen all at once. It builds quietly until one day you realize you've been standing in the middle of it the whole time. If you've ever felt like something in your own life didn't sit right, don't ignore it. Look closer. Ask questions. Protect what's yours before someone else decides it belongs to them. And if this story felt real to you, if it reminded you of something you've seen or lived through, make sure you're subscribed. Because this channel is built on real stories. Stories about betrayal, about survival, and about people who found a way to take their lives back without losing themselves in the process. Stay with me.